She didn't scream when they told her the truth. Queens don't scream. But the moment they whispered that her daughter's ship had vanished into a burning starfield, something inside her broke. Quietly, like glass no one hears until it's too late. For years, she ruled an empire while carrying a grief sharp enough to cut worlds in half. So when a wounded warship suddenly returned from the void, carrying her long-lost daughter in shattered armor, and a human walking beside her, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Because humans weren't supposed to survive wars like this. They definitely weren't supposed to bring royalty home alive. And yet, he did that. If you enjoy powerful HFY stories, wild sci-fi twists, and moments that hit straight in the chest, feel free to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good humans or awesome tale. It really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate you being here. The Palace of Lumerus had never been this quiet. Not even during the oldest wars, not during the dark winters when the suns dimmed, not even on the nights when assassins stalked the royal halls. Nothing compared to this thick, breathless silence. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a mother grieving a daughter she refused to bury. Queen Athelia sat atop her obsidian throne, her posture sharp but her spirit frayed. No one dared mention the princess's name anymore. It was spoken like a ghost, softly, carefully, as if saying it too loudly might shatter the queen completely. Years had passed since the day the report arrived. Princess Sarai's ship destroyed in battle. No survivors located. The words were burned into the queen's mind, as permanent as scars on stone. But she never accepted it. She couldn't. What mother could? Every night, long after the palace torches dimmed, Athelia wandered the crystalline gardens where Sarai once danced as a child, leaving trails of laughter behind her. The queen would pause at the waterfall her daughter loved, touching the cold surface of the water as if hoping to feel her daughter's warmth in its reflection. She whispered the same question to the stars each night, "Where are you?" and received nothing back but wind and silence. The empire felt the weight of her mourning. Generals argued. Borders trembled. Enemies pushed closer, emboldened by her grief. Some whispered that an empire without an heir was an empire already dying. But Athelia kept ruling, clad in armor made of sheer will. She hid her grief behind her crown and ruled a crumbling star domain, all while carrying a hope she could never explain. A mother's intuition, perhaps, or maybe a refusal to let the universe take the last piece of her heart. Then, one cycle, not long after another night spent staring into the void, something happened. A trembling young officer sprinted into the throne room at dawn, clutching a datapad as if it were a holy relic. His breath shook. His hands trembled. The guards tried to calm him, but he pushed past them, eyes wild with disbelief. "My queen is signal." He held out the device. Athelia barely glanced at it first. The Empire received thousands of signals each day, static debris pings, encoded noise from dying satellites. But then she heard the faint tone hidden beneath the interference, a rhythm she knew better than her own heartbeat. A royal code, her daughter's code. The queen's hand froze. Her heart did too. The room spun in slow motion as she took the device, the signal repeating in short, broken pulses. Most of it was static. Most of it was damaged beyond repair. But the core signature? Unmistakable. Sarai. The court burst into frantic whispers. Advisors insisted it was a trap. Spies insisted it was an enemy trick. Generals practically begged her not to take false hope seriously. But Athelia no longer heard them. Not a single word. She stood, shoulders straightening, as if someone had lifted a mountain from her back. "Locate its origin," she ordered. The palace stirred into motion. Outposts activated. Arrays scanned the void. A faint trail, a signal path bouncing off dust rings and broken moons, revealed the transmission came from deep beyond the Empire's borders. A dead zone where no patrols flew. But one ship was there, a broken one, slowly drifting toward Imperial space. Athelia stared at the hologram of it, a warship moving like a wounded beast, engines flickering, hull torn open. A ship that technically should not be functioning at all. She whispered the word she had never allowed herself to say aloud. Sarai? 2 days later, Imperial gunships surrounded the drifting vessel. They scanned it again and again, desperate to disprove what the Queen hoped with all her heart, that this was real. The signal was weak, shattered, but consistent. Inside that broken ship, someone was alive. Athelia arrived at the royal docks before dawn. She wore ceremonial armor polish to mirror shine, not for show, but because she needed to look unbreakable. Her people had to see a ruler, not a mother trembling inside. The crowds gathered in complete silence. Even the wind dared not whisper. The broken warship descended, sparks trailing from its belly like falling stars. The ramp hissed. Steam spilled across the landing deck. Shadows moved inside. Then she stepped out. Princess Sarai, her armor cracked, her face scarred, her body exhausted, but alive. For a moment, the Queen forgot how to breathe. The galaxy narrowed to a single point, her daughter standing at the bottom of the ramp, looking at her with eyes filled with years of suffering and survival. Athelia wanted to run to her, to embrace her, to cry, to scream, to fall to her knees and thank every star in existence. But queens do not run. Queens do not crumble. Queens must show strength. So she stood tall, but her hands, hidden inside her sleeves, shook. Sarai descended slowly. 2 steps, 3 steps, each heavier than the last. Every eye in the Empire watched, tears gathering on the faces of even the hardest soldiers. Halfway down the ramp, Sarai paused, and someone stepped out beside her. A human, tall, silent, wearing torn combat gear and carrying scars that told stories no one here had the courage to ask about. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Guards instinctively drew weapons. Advisors whispered in alarm. Generals bristled, offended at the sight. Humans were considered weak, primitive, barely spacefaring, certainly not fit to walk beside royalty as an equal. And yet Sarai's hand rested lightly on the human's arm, steady and natural, as if he had been her shield through every nightmare of the void. Athelia's eyes narrowed, not in hatred, but in instinctive calculation. Who was this human? Why did her daughter stand with him so closely? How had a human survived where entire fleets had fallen? And why did Sarai look at him with such fierce trust? The princess bowed before her mother, her voice thin but unbroken. "I have returned, my queen," she said, "and I did not return alone." A single tear escaped the queen despite all her discipline. She touched Sarai's cheek, just for a heartbeat. A mother's heartbeat, the one thing she could not control. "You live," she whispered, the words trembling. "Yes," Sarai replied softly, "and this human is the reason why." The palace erupted into chaos. Whispers, outrage, fear. A human, savior of the royal heir? But none of that mattered to the queen. Her daughter was alive, and her empire, once dying, was about to change forever. The return of the princess should have been a moment of pure celebration. Bells ringing, crowds cheering, the empire roaring back to life. But instead, the palace was a storm without wind. A quiet, coiled tension filled every corner, every hallway, every watching eye. Because Sarai did not return alone. She returned with a human. Word of it spread across the capital faster than fire through dry leaves. Servants whispered behind silk curtains. Guards exchanged uneasy glances. Nobles concealed their shock with jeweled fans, hiding trembling lips behind polished arrogance. For generations, humans were seen as a minor species, useful at times, harmless most of the time, irrelevant all the time. And now, one of them walked beside the Empire's future queen. Sarai stood tall despite exhaustion, her armor still bearing the soot and scorches of battles she had never described. But the human beside her drew nearly as much attention as she did. His steps were grounded, steady, calm, almost too calm for someone standing in the heart of an alien empire that viewed humans as little more than soft-bodied curiosities. He didn't bow. He didn't shrink. He didn't look away. The palace guards hated that. The nobles feared that. And the queen studied him like a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "Bring the princess to the healing chambers," The general barked, voice sharp with authority. But Sarai shook her head. Not without him. The general blinked, taken aback. Princess, the human will be escorted. He will walk with me, Sarai said, voice stronger this time. He has earned that right. The general hesitated, visibly fighting the urge to argue. But the queen raised one hand, a silent command. The guards stepped aside, though their stares were knives. Athelia walked ahead, leading her daughter through the palace. The human followed, his eyes flicking from shadow to shadow, as if expecting danger even inside the empire's most secure halls. That detail was not lost on the queen. It meant this man lived in a constant state of vigilance. It meant he had survived things that forced him to evolve past fear. And it meant that whatever he and Sarai had been through had not been simple. The palace doctors swarmed Sarai the moment she entered the healing suite. They scanned her wounds, murmuring in shock at the deep scars across her ribs, the burns on her back, the healed fractures on her arms and legs. These weren't the injuries of a princess protected by fleets. These were the wounds of someone who survived by clawing her way through hell. Athelia watched her daughter with a heart heavy from grief and awe, but her gaze always drifted back to the human. He stood by the far wall, arms crossed, posture relaxed but ready. The faint glow of the room's healing pools reflected off the scars along his forearms, scars far too numerous to be accidents. When Sarai finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. He saved me. The queen exhaled, not in relief, but in restrained emotion. She wanted answers. She wanted explanations. She wanted the truth more than she wanted sleep, pride, or even a crown. You will tell me everything, she said. Sarai nodded. But when the queen glanced at the human again, something unexpected tightened in her chest. Her daughter trusted him, fully, without hesitation. That alone was enough to make a mother afraid. Hours later, the council chamber filled with armored generals, scholars, nobles dripping in jewels, and spies wearing expressions like carved stone. The queen entered with Sarai at her side. The human followed, still unbound, still unbroken. That alone sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. Athelia raised her chin. My daughter lives, she declared, and you will hear how. The room fell silent. Sarai stepped forward. Her voice did not waver. When my ship fell, I was thrown into the void. Alone. My crew dead. Escape pods destroyed. The council murmured. Some looked away, unable to imagine their princess drifting among torn metal and vacuum frost. And then Sarai continued. This human found me. All eyes turned toward him, some with skepticism, some with hostility, a few with a dawning, reluctant respect. Sarai recounted their journey, how he dragged her from the wreckage despite his own wounds, how they hid from enemy trackers on shattered moons, how he fought, not like a soldier trained for parade formations, but like a creature forged by survival itself. How he adapted faster than her enemies, faster than the terrain, faster than death. He protected me when I could not stand, she said quietly. He carried me when I could not walk. And when I believed I would die, he looked at me and said, not today. Even a most hardened general shifted at that. Her next words were heavier. You believe humans are fragile, weak, predictable. You're wrong. The council erupted instantly. Blasphemy. Princess, you are confused. He manipulated you. A human cannot be a warrior. Athelia raised her hand, and silence slammed into the chamber like a hammer. Her gaze slid to the human. What is your name? He hesitated for the first time, not in fear, just choosing how much of himself to give these strangers. Jace, he finally said. A simple name. Hard consonants. Human. Jace, the queen repeated. You know you stand in a hall where no human has ever stood before without chains. He met her gaze evenly. I am aware. She studied him. Why did you save my daughter? What do you gain from protecting a princess of an empire that has never cared for your kind? Jace's answer was simple. Almost too simple. She didn't give up, he said, even when everything else did. The words struck the chamber like a quiet explosion. Sarai looked at him with a soft, fierce pride. The queen saw it. The council saw it. and the realization settled like dust. This was not a rescue. This was a bond born from war, a bond no throne could erase. Then, before anyone could respond, alarms blared across the palace. A voice crackled through the comm systems. "Your Majesty, enemy assassins breaching the southern wing, multiple squads, armed, advancing toward the royal chambers." The council erupted into panic. The queen turned sharply. Sarai reached for her blade. Guards sprinted into formation. And Jace was already moving. Faster than the guards. Faster than the princess. Faster than fear. He was running toward the danger. Because protecting Sarai wasn't a duty to him. It was instinct. And that was the moment the queen realized. This human was far more dangerous and far more vital than anyone in her empire had ever imagined. The palace had survived countless wars, uprisings, and cosmic storms, but had never felt fear the way it did that night. The alarms screamed like wounded metal, pulsing through every hall, every chamber, every trembling breath. The shadows shivered with movement. Blades glinted between columns. The assassins were already inside. Not rebels, not thieves, enemy elites, the kind sent only when an empire is judged ready to fall. In the chaos, Sarai drew her blade in one swift, silent motion. Her instincts flared, her muscles remembering battles she wished she could forget. But before she could sprint forward, a blur of motion streaked past her. Jace. He was running straight toward the attackers with a speed that made even battle-hardened guards hesitate. No fear, no hesitation, just pure, distilled purpose. "Jace!" Sarai called out. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He only raised 2 fingers, a silent signal she remembered from their months of survival. "Stay alive. I'll handle it." The first clash came at the southern corridor. The assassins moved like ghosts, slipping across marble floors with deadly grace. But Jace met them with something far more brutal than grace. Raw human ferocity, sharpened by experience. He punched, blocked, twisted, and struck with a precision that caught the aliens off guard. His movements weren't elegant. They weren't ceremonial. They were efficient, ruthless, designed to end a threat in seconds. One assassin lunged. Jace sidestepped, slammed his elbow into the creature's throat, and finished with a clean strike to the knee that sent the alien collapsing. Another attack from behind. Jace spun, grabbing its wrist and using its momentum to slam it into a stone pillar hard enough to crack the surface. A third rushed with a plasma blade. Jace ducked, rolled, and swept the attacker's legs, pulling the alien forward so its own blade pierced its armored ally. This was not the fighting style of a trained soldier from any empire. This was the fighting style of a human who had learned to survive where no rules existed. Sarai arrived seconds later, blade flashing in arcs of silver fire. She fought back-to-back with Jace, every movement synced, refined through countless battles they endured together. Guards poured into the corridor at last, stunned at the sight. A human and the Empire's heir, fighting as one. The assassins were dead within minutes. Jace wiped blood from his forehead, calm despite the chaos. "That wasn't a raid," he muttered. "It was a probe." Sarai stiffened. "You think more are coming?" "They were testing your defenses," he replied. "They'll strike harder next." He said it so casually that the guards stared at him in disbelief. Only Sarai understood the weight behind his tone. He'd spoken like that before, on the worlds where they hid, on the nights they spent listening to enemy ships searching for them. Every time he'd said those words, danger followed, and he had never been wrong. Minutes later, the War Council gathered in full force. Holographic star maps glowed across the chamber, illuminating the tension-filled faces of generals, strategists, and nobles. Red dots, enemy signatures, spread across the border like a slowly tightening noose. The assassins were only the beginning, a strategist whispered. "They've been gathering fleets for months." Another murmured, pale with dread. Sarai stood beside her mother, head held high. Jace stood behind them, silent but observant, his eyes scanning not the maps, but the expressions of every person in the room. Athelia raised her voice. "Report." A general stepped forward. "Your Majesty, New scans show enemy movements forming attack spirals. We predict they intend to strike within 30 cycles. 30 cycles? A noble gasp. We are not ready. We can't fight a superpower with half-broken fleets, another snarled. And whose fault is that? Someone shouted. Accusations flew like arrows, bouncing off stone walls and old grudges. Pride, fear, and arrogance poisoned every word, until Sarai stepped forward. Enough. Her voice wasn't loud, but cut through the room with the sharpness of a blade. Everyone fell silent. You keep asking what we lack, she said, but you refuse to see what we have. She glanced over her shoulder at Jace. The council followed her gaze with a mixture of irritation and reluctant curiosity. Athelia's eyebrow lifted slightly. You believe this human can turn the tide of war? Sarai didn't answer. Jace did. I can't win a war alone, he said calmly. But I know how your enemies think. I know how they move. I know what they expect and what they never will. The chamber erupted in scoffs. What could a human possibly know about star warfare? You fight with fists and instinct, not strategy. You survived out of luck. Jay stepped forward, unshaken. Luck didn't keep your princess alive, he said simply. I did. The insulted nobles went silent. Even the generals flinched. Sarai's chest tightened, not in embarrassment, but in pride. Athelia lifted her hand. Let him speak. The room reluctantly obeyed. Jace approached the holographic star map, touching a point of light with 2 fingers. It shifted, expanded, revealing fleet pathways. These routes, he said, are predictable. Too predictable. Your enemies have mapped them, memorized them, and prepared traps for every traditional formation you've used for centuries. A general bristled. Our formations are victories refined. Your enemies adapted. Jace interrupted. And you didn't. Shock. Anger. A few murmurs of agreement. Jace continued. Your ships are strong, but slow. Your weapons powerful, but rigid. Your tactics honorable, but obvious. He highlighted 3 enemy fleet clusters. They're going to strike here, here, and here. Not for victory, yet. Their first wave is meant to fracture morale. Break your unity. Force panic. A strategist frowned. How do you know their plan? Jace's eyes darkened with a memory Sarai knew too well. Because they used the same pattern when hunting us. Sarai's throat tightened. She remembered that hunt. Worlds burning. Skies filled with enemy fire. Knights hiding beneath collapsed structures, while Jace planned routes in the dirt with broken pieces of metal. He had predicted every move then. He was predicting every move now. Sarai stepped forward. His strategies saved my life. If you want this empire to survive, you will listen. The council exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, the queen spoke. What do you propose, Jace? He exhaled slowly. Stop fighting like an empire, he said. Start fighting like survivors. And then he explained. Small, fast strike teams instead of lumbering fleets. Silent movements through dust rings and comet trails. Hidden traps on abandoned moons. Decoy ships drifting like debris. Ambush patterns built on unpredictability, not honor. Using the enemy's confidence against them. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Not dismissive, not mocking, just silent. Because every person in that chamber knew one thing. His plan was insane, radical, dishonorable, and exactly what they needed. Finally, Athelia stood. Prepare the fleets, she said, voice echoing through the chamber. We fight his way. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Jace lowered his gaze respectfully, not bowing, but acknowledging her trust. Sarai smiled softly. The queen added, if we fall with fire. If we rise with the dawn. The chamber erupted into motion. And as the empire moved to war, Sarai leaned close to Jace and whispered, Are you ready? He gave a faint, fierce smile. I've been ready since the day I found you. The dawn of war did not rise with sunlight. It rose with fire. From the highest balconies of the palace, the queen watched her fleets ascend into the sky. Thousands of ships, once symbols of a fading empire, now sharpened into weapons of survival. Their engines roared like awakening beasts, shaking the towers and echoing across the capital. But this time, The Empire wasn't marching into battle with tradition. This time, it carried the mind of a human survivor. Sarai stood beside her mother, armor refitted, gaze fixed on the growing glow of engines. She was no longer the princess who had gone missing. She was harder, sharper, tempered by war. The scars on her arms weren't marks of weakness. They were medals of survival. Behind her, Jace quietly checked the straps of his gear. He looked out of place among the elegant alien armor, but somehow, he also looked more prepared than anyone else. His presence radiated something that unsettled the nobles and comforted the soldiers. Calm in the face of the impossible. "Are you certain this plan will work?" the queen asked without looking at him. Jace didn't hesitate. "Certain? No, but it's the only plan your enemy won't predict." Athelia glanced at him, searching his face. Humans were unreadable to her. They weren't born into empires or shaped by decades of war. Yet somehow, this one had the instincts of a veteran general. "Bring my daughter home," she said quietly. Jace nodded once. "I will." There were no grand speeches, no last-minute declarations. They had no time for theatrics. The real war was already unfolding among the stars. The jump into the battlefield was a descent into chaos. Sarai's command ship burst into contested space with a violent flash of light, trailing a squadron of fast-attack fighters. The sight before them froze every breath on the bridge. The enemy fleet covered the stars like a swarm of steel locusts. Massive warships, each one larger than the royal palace, surged forward in endless formation. Their weapons glowed like gathering suns. Their numbers were so vast that space itself seemed to bend beneath them. But Sarai didn't flinch. "Phase 1, she said. "Execute." Dozens of tiny ships shot forward, faster than anything the Empire had ever deployed. They weaved through asteroids, debris fields, pockets of dust. They struck quickly, firing bursts of concentrated plasma before vanishing into the black like sparks in a storm. The enemy reacted just as Jace had predicted, confused, irritated, chasing shadows rather than advancing in unity. Sarai glanced at him. "They're taking the bait." Jace leaned over the tactical screen. "Good. Keep pulling them apart. The more they split, the more they expose their soft spots." Soft spots. The Empire's generals hated that term. The enemy had no soft spots, they'd argued. But Jace saw what they didn't. Every giant has joints. The first major impact hit at the dust rings of heroin. Enemy cruisers pushed through the swirling cloud of cosmic debris. Too confident, too aggressive, too certain the Empire was broken. They didn't notice the mines hidden among the rocks until the explosions tore through their hulls. A wave of fire rippled through the ring. Sarai clenched her fist. "Beautiful." Jace smirked. "That's the idea." With the enemy's front line fractured, Sarai launched the second wave. Ships darted from behind shattered moons, striking in unpredictable angles. Every attack was fast, every retreat faster. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. Reports flooded the command deck. Enemy flank collapsing. Third cruiser disabled. They're losing formation. The crew looked at Jace with disbelief. This was strategy forged not in classrooms, but in the ashes of fallen worlds. But the enemy still held their greatest weapons. And when their dreadnoughts activated, the sky turned white. The enemy unleashed beams so powerful they carved through empty space, melting asteroids into liquid glass. Entire squadrons were vaporized in moments. A single dreadnought blast nearly split Sarai's ship in half. Her crew screamed as sparks exploded across the bridge. "We can't take another hit like that," an officer shouted. Jace didn't panic. He scanned the star map quickly, calculating in real time. "They're overcommitting power to those beams," he said. "They'll have to cool down between shots." "How long?" Sarai asked. Jace stared at the pulsing glow of the dreadnoughts. "Maybe 10 seconds." Sarai smirked. "Plenty." She grabbed the comm. "All units. Dreadnought cooldown detected. Engage Phase 3. Dozens of hidden batteries, buried on abandoned moons and camouflaged in debris fields, sprang to life. They unleashed a barrage of explosives, missiles, plasma charges, electromagnetic disruptors. The dreadnoughts trembled under the assault. One cracked open like a burning fruit, spilling molten metal into space. Jace nodded. One down. Sarai grinned. Then let's take the others. The battle spun into chaos. It was unlike any war the Empire had ever fought. There were no perfect lines, no formations, no honor-bound confrontations. This was unpredictable, violent, tactical insanity. It was a human-style war. The enemy began to falter, confused by the sheer randomness of the Empire's attacks. Attacks Jace designed with one goal: break their confidence. Because once confidence breaks, armies crumble. The final blow came at the edge of Shattered Moon. The largest enemy command ship advanced, protected by dozens of escorts. Its cannons glowed like forming supernovas. "They're charging the main cannon," an officer yelled. Jace's voice was calm. "Pull them in closer." Sarai nodded without question. The crew, however, erupted. "Closer? That's suicide. They'll vaporize us. We'll never survive that blast." Jace pointed at the Shattered Moon. "Trust me." Sarai slammed her palm onto the console. "Do it." Her ship dove forward, engines screaming. The enemy commander took the bait, ordering all ships to focus fire. At the last second, Jace shouted, "Now!" Sarai swung the ship behind the moon's largest fragment. The enemy fired. The blast struck the ancient lunar shell and detonated the network of hidden charges Jace had buried there. A chain reaction ripped through the moon, sending a shockwave of molten rock and explosive plasma outward in all directions. The enemy fleet didn't have time to react. Their command ship cracked. Engines ruptured. Weapons overloaded. And the entire front line was obliterated in a single, blinding moment. Silence fell on the battlefield. Then, slowly, enemy ships began fleeing into the void. The Empire had won. Not through strength, not through tradition, through the mind of a human who refused to lose. When Jace and Sarai returned to the palace, the capital erupted in celebration. Bells thundered, banners unfurled. The people cried with joy and disbelief. Athelia met them at the throne room steps. Her daughter dismounted first, then Jace. The queen looked at him for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "Your courage saved my daughter," she said softly. "But your mind saved my empire." Jace opened his mouth to respond, but the queen held up a hand. She stepped forward and placed her palm on his shoulder. "From this day forward," she declared, voice echoing across the chamber, "you are protector of the crown, the shield of my daughter, and a guardian of our future." Gasps filled the hall. Sarai smiled, soft, proud, unguarded. Jace bowed his head, not out of submission, but out of respect. The queen continued, "Let the galaxy remember this day, the day a human rewrote an empire's fate." In that moment, under the blazing lights of the throne room, a new era began. Not an alien era, not a human era, something greater. A future where legends walked side by side, and where humanity's fire shone brighter than ever across the stars.